Gonna bang him, he's gonna bang me. Gonna lose my virginity. I'm 24, tits are saggy, but tits time see me, see happy.
What happened?
Oh, what the hell? We may be tokens, but we're damn good looking ones.
Hello, hi, and how are you? Welcome back to another episode of Referential. As always, I am your host, Dr. Khalid Nas. This is video episode 4, Black Girlhood. Let's go! I got an episode that I'm really excited to share with you today, where I'm joined by a first-time guest to talk about Black girlhood, coming-of-age narratives, and adultification. My guest for this episode is OG Nerd of Praise Shannon Miller, cultural commentator and writer who you might previously know for being managing editor at Adweek and previously a news editor and writer at the AV Club. You can find Shannon at Shannon L. Miller on Blue Sky, Shannon L_Miller on Instagram, and more of her thoughts on pop culture on Pop Dish Kitchen on Instagram and TikTok. But to get going with that, I need to start us off with a little clip. So this is Dr. Monique Morris in conversation with Anita Hill on the Getting Even podcast in 2022. They are talking about Black girlhood and adultification. You can find a link for the full episode in the show notes. In 3, 2, and...
Black girls are seen as available to the public. Black girls are, in their bodies, in their language, in their creativity, treated as if they are disposable and that their being is negotiable. And that plays out in a lot of different ways. It plays out in the reading of their behaviors as more adult-like. We now talk about as adultification of Black girls, and the way in which that then leads to the reading of their behaviors as worthy of, harsher punishment than their white counterparts, mostly because it erases their childhood and denies them an opportunity to express their fullness as a growing young person. Dr. Jamelia Blake and Rebecca Epstein at the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality did a report that looked at adultification and found that Black girls experience this reading of their behaviors as more adult-like from the age of 5, and it peaks when they're between the ages of 10 and 14. And that then means that the adults around them are seeing them as in need of less protection, less comfort. They are seen as more independent, to know more about adult subject matter like sex than their white counterparts. And so that leads to how we then understand their capacities around and experiences with trauma, whether we recognize their trauma or not.
Shannon and I focus in on the theme of Black girlhood and coming-of-age narratives in media spanning Daria and Chewing Gum to Living Single and Megan Thee Stallion. We talk about fictions versus realities and all the discourse that's in between. Just a little note, this episode is a day late from announced because there were some audio issues that you will hear for the first 18-ish minutes of the episode. I managed my best to clean them up, but apologies anyway. Alright, and that's enough of the intro. I will catch you back here in the end with just a few more words. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you for listening. I said this already when we just entered the room. I am trying to get all the nerds of prey on my podcast so I can trick you and scam you into forming a podcast again, or just to have your voice on the airwaves to share your thoughts, because you are valuable people whose opinions I really care about, and I want you back. God damn it.
First of all, that is a low bar goal. It is not hard to get us back on the air at all. We are natural yappers, and we're all still very tightly linked, a little bit codependent on each other, and just still trying to figure it out. And I am very excited to be here as well. It's funny because you build this platform, and I think that from the outside it looks like it's this wide ocean of engagement, and that it's too impossible to pick out the faces that have been there from the beginning. You've definitely been there since like day one.
I was waiting on you at the door.
It's really cool to be able to connect directly in this way. Hopefully we can do more of that in the future, and hopefully we can do more of that with more of us, because we are still very much all up under each other. It's just schedules. That's it. That's the only thing. And I low-key love this goal of just luring us back to the airwaves with a carrot on a stick.
One of these days, I'm going to pretend I'm doing an episode, and really I'm just going to send an invite link to all 4 of you, and then just be like, I'm just going to go away now. Y'all know how this works by now, right? I'll produce.
Not a parent trap.
Ooh, I like that. You're already like seeding in. We're doing coming of age stories today. In case y'all didn't read the title or what this episode is about. But so Alaska's looking at me like she wants me to feed her or she's going to attack me.
Now, there's a few things happening right now. There's an alarm going off. I don't know why or for what reason. So give me 1 second to sniff that out. I am so sorry. This, by the way, is just like what freelance life is. You set very random alarms for yourself that only make sense for 24 hours. And
oh God, you're preaching to the choir. Yeah, my thing now is I'm telling people that I want to be a freelance doctor, a professional queer. If you need someone to say, that gets the gay okay.
It's me.
I immediately, every doctoral school, every single university needs to make sure that they open up the pathways and give you the resources for that specifically. You would have sold me either way, but the gay okay, we need that.
I'm trying very hard. I'm hustling. I've been doing this for 1 year now, and it's been an interesting experience. I was doing it as an excuse to reach out to people, to meet people, and to see what that actually manifested into and how much I wrapped myself into it has been really lovely. So I really relate to what you're saying. But I think as someone who was a fan and who, I guess, consumed the work that you were doing, I really want to make sure that you feel and see how valuable it was and how meaningful it was to a lot of people, especially a few years on out from it, because a lot of the times doing it out of impulse, because we feel like our perspectives aren't really heard, our opinions aren't really the ones that are sought after. You're part of my entryway to falling in love with things like fandom and to feel like I had a place into that conversation. And my perspective was just as valued and seen because I heard it reiterated in you guys. So thank you for making that show and for sharing it with us, really.
Oh, no. Goodness gracious, thank you so much. I think you hit the nail on the head. You create these things and you put it in the void and hope that people listen. But mainly you do it because you feel like you are determined to not be voiceless in this wide mass of communication. And if people latch onto it, yay. But you never expect it to have any form of a lasting impact. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And I speak on all four of us because I think far too often we read things and we're like, that was great. And then we never get a chance to tell the person that it had some sort of an impact, like quick to call it frivolous. I'm really proud of what we built and I miss it dearly. I think we all do. But to see this is really cool. And now we get to pull a reverse Uno and stand you and be your fans. And
that is very kind of you. Thank you.
So congratulations on a year of what is truly, truly stimulating and really just awesome as hell conversation.
Thank you very much. And since we're on that topic of talking about different perspectives and the importance of it, the reason I asked you on here today, we initially started talking about Daria and chewing gums. But one thing I know about you, you really value and you really care about coming of age narratives, specifically those that concern or can be related to the perspective of Black girls and Black young femme people. So let's just jump straight to the conversation. What is it about coming of age narratives that really impacted you and why it's something you still crave out as part of your media diet?
I think it's a bit of a twofold. Externally, when you hear people talk about the media that most influences them, a lot of times it's coming of age narratives. And that spans different genres. There's coming of age in sci-fi. There's coming of age in comedy, in tragedy, in horror. Because there's so much flexibility, you get a bunch of different answers in terms of, hey, what's the bit of media that really guided you? That was a thread that was connecting a lot of things. You can have The Breakfast Club. You can have I Know What You Did Last Summer. But the unifier is, I think for a lot of people, we were looking towards entertainment to help us sort out our own mess or figure out how to escape from that. And this was a strong narrative that crossed so many genres and so many genders and experiences that it's hard not to put a bit of weight on it in terms of importance. I think that coming of age has a weird inherent responsibility, which I wrestle with that because you make art to make art. You don't necessarily sign up to raise children. It has a lot of power depending on how you tell those stories. Internally, I think I gravitate towards coming of age now because I look back at what coming of age looked like for women like me. Not that we didn't have anything, but as Black girls, Black women, Black femmes, a lot of it was rooted in like trauma and a little bit of in violence. Now leaning on some of those narratives as an adult with a daughter, I have more of a chance to heal something within myself by seeing way more varied narratives. I'm now going through, I don't know if it's like this sort of downloading midlife crisis or just like an existential crisis that's I'm holding at bay. Leave me alone.
It's coming.
Just get off my back. But also, what is it you're trying to tell me? I'm now going through this thing where I'm really examining the media that I'm gravitating towards and why. Because I've noticed that I do very much stick with lighter comedies, coming of age narratives, even throughout a lot of my career working at the AV Club and being able to be a culture critic. A lot of my focus in my discipline, you would call it, entertainment for younger audiences, because it has shifted and changed so much. And I like it because I didn't have it. Now my daughter does. And I get to see her grow up with these really cool, meaty narratives. And it's shaping her understanding of the world in a way that I had to really work hard to learn within myself. I love its power and its output. And I think the more responsible you are with it, the more of a chance you have of shaping a better world, which is lofty, but I've seen crazier things. Yeah,
doable. When you were talking about how coming of age narratives and stories for younger people are something that you gravitate towards now, you made me flash towards a conversation I had a few days ago with a friend of mine where I caught him making fun of Steven Universe, and I was like, wait a minute, how dare you? Not Steven Universe.
We won't do this. We won't do this.
I was getting ready to fight, but then he wasn't really making fun of Steven Universe. He was making fun of that sect of Steven Universe fans who are a bit insane on the internet and do a lot.
Fair.
That's like a genre of fan. Yeah, that just made me go on a bit of a spiral into thinking about, I really gravitate towards these children media, especially this past year. I've been watching a lot of TV shows, and I'm not really a rewatcher. I usually watch the thing and then I feel like I'll have an imprint, and I'm always hesitant about going back.
Yeah.
But I started doing that this year and re-examining my feelings and sitting down with the child and thinking about, these are the things that constructed me. And for me, they've operated as almost a source of comfort, stuff that I can reach to, not just as healing or addressing my own child, but also having hope for the children of the future, that this is what they're watching. Especially as a queer person, I need that comfort. But then we jumped straight into talking about coming of age, but we didn't actually define it. I was wondering if you could define to me, what is a coming of age narrative in your perspective?
I think that a coming of age narrative sits at the nexus of where you are now and what's to come. This idea of moving into a new defining era. Like, we have these milestones that come with a lot of decentering. Okay, what does this mean now that I'm in high school, now that I'm in college, now that I'm moving out of college and into the real world? It's a flash at the transitioning era between where you are and where you're going. And because it's wide open, we don't explore enough how malleable that narrative is. We're so used to coming of age, that's middle school going into high school, going into college. But what about the idea of really confronting your mortality when you move from your 30s to your 40s, your 50s to your 60s, when you are now at this point where all you've known is work and now you have to retire. You have to figure out, what does my life look like that I'm a retired person? I look to my mom as a reaffirmation of that. She just retired like 6 months ago, and to see this metamorphosis of this woman that has worked all her life and all of mine go into this thing where it's now I just have to worry about me. My kids are adults. I don't have to worry about an entire school district. I am now what she likes to call herself is a lady of leisure. What does that look like? Which I'm like, go off.
Oh my God. I'm stealing that. I'm taking that.
She interjects it every single time. She's, now that I'm a lady of leisure. And it's so great because she is British. So it's actually like lady of leisure. But it's so beautiful to witness this. I had to go on a mother-daughter trip to New York. She never got to go on a plane or go on vacation qualifications or do any of that since coming over from England. And I have this moment where I'm watching her experience this new environment in her 60s going into her 70s, having a bit of a coming of age moment herself, where I'm experiencing a new version of my life, and I have no clue who I'm going to be on the other side of this. And that's really exciting and scary, but it's a valuable narrative. It all fits into what coming of age is.
From what you're saying, it reminds me of this idea that I always like return to, talking about utopia and how utopia is something that we'll ever reach. Utopia is a process. In those moments of disorienting transitions when you have to decide who you are, which is what stories show, they also showcase possibility, which I think is part of the reason why I also gravitate towards them. And the ways other identity markers, if you will, end up complicating them. We're specifically focusing on this topic of Black girlhood and the representations of Black coming of age narratives and the way that they've occupied the media over the past couple of years. Tell me a little bit about the stuff that you've been gravitating towards or that have showcased those narratives. Your impressions about what those themes developed when we add a Black lens to it.
Lately, if we're being real in terms of what I've consumed, I've just delved into complete escapism. And I think that is just the sheer where we are in terms of, okay, I can't be fooling with y'all. I need to deal with absolute beautiful garbage. So sticking into
what have you been watching?
The reality realm of just
midwives and their lives.
Love is Blind, The Circle, really into.
Oh my God, I was such a circle head for the first couple of seasons. I got too into that show. I got too into those dynamics. I had to stop.
It's after you're just like, oh, no, this is going to a place. But you mentioned that you're not much of a rewatcher, whereas I am like a total rewatcher. I tend to lean on the things that I know are going to bring me the joy I'm looking for. And it's funny, now that I'm really having to sit with it, I don't know that I've really gotten an opportunity, at least lately in the past few months, to really just sit with the state of TV. And I've been more leaning on music lately and delving into that just because I think I was reaching such a frustration and sadness with TV lately. I think just outside of any specific narrative, just the state of it, the erosion of physical media, the streaming state where there's no more permanence. There's more, I can leave this here and come back to it because special interest and these like streaming conglomerates now find it okay to just wipe art off the face of the earth when it doesn't serve them financially. And I think that I'm wrestling with a bit of that. So I have been leaning on some of the oldies but goodies that can stick around. Like, speaking of Steven Universe, my daughter has really been into Steven Universe lately. So we're like, yeah, dope. Let's sit down and go through that. So right now we're on the Peridot arc where Peridot comes to Earth. And I was watching that this week. I was revisiting Daria just because I had to recently write about it. One, which I really enjoyed, sort of looking at how it shifted over the years and how much music shaped that show and what happened to it once you took the music away, because rights became very expensive and they had to like basically strip that identity. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I was watching English Teacher on Hulu.
Oh yeah, that's a great show.
On loop. But even coming into this taping, I had actually, when you had asked, I had just finished rewatching Chewing Gum.
Oh yeah?
Just finished rewatching it. Because I was like, I wonder if it holds up. And most of it still does, which is fantastic. It's funny, I didn't realize that was something that I was wrestling with until you asked that.
As you've recently rewatched Chewing Gum, you've recently written about Daria and thought about it intently. Can you give us some of your impressions from those viewings? What has changed from your first viewings of them and your more recent encounters with them?
I didn't realize just how much Jodie meant to me in Daria until later, until I really had the language to describe her place in my life. Because before, growing up as like a young millennial, everyone wanted to be Daria. That was the thing. You wanted to have this sort of cool, unfazed look at the world around you and have this deep understanding of humanity and how we show up in it. So at the time when I was younger, like, Daria is my avatar. Like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And parts of those are still true, maybe. But rewatching it, there was a quote that Jodie had where she just broke down how much she wished that she had the room to be like Daria, but she's too busy having to be everything to everybody else, having to be the best.
Smart and too sensitive to live in a world like ours at a time like this with a sister like mine. Maybe I do miss out on stuff, but this attitude is what works for me now.
Then you'll understand what works for me now. At home, I'm Jodie. I can say or do whatever feels right. But at school, I'm the queen of the Negroes, the perfect African-American teen, the role model for all of the other African-American teens at Lawndale. Oops, where'd they go?
Oops,
Where'd they go?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. And it's funny when you're a younger Black woman, and especially, or a younger Black girl, labeled as gifted or advanced, whatever label they decided was cool and okay at that time, to just note that you were like somewhat smart. There's a very shared experience there for young Black smart girls in schools where they may be part of the minority, or in some cases maybe even the only one or one of three. I grew up in a neighborhood that was very diverse. I was lucky enough to have that. It still didn't stop white administrators from trotting out me and girls like me as like this trophy to be displayed to other school systems. Education we afforded these poor Black girls, and look how smart they are because of us, like, bow to us. There are so many Jodies that have to be the Jodie going into their professional lives, where, especially if you work in media, going into your first meeting with your new media colleagues and will not say family, but colleagues, popping onto that virtual room and notice playing a game of find the other. Am I by myself? And only maybe finding one or two, especially when you're in the media space, it's not uncommon for your work and your likeness to be heralded as, look at us, bastion of progressiveness. Look at this Black editor that we have. And that's not a dig at any of my past places. I love it.
It's just a statement of fact. Yeah, it's what happens.
It's what happens. It happens across. And Jodie really spoke to the pressure of being the only one and what that means, and what that means for people coming in behind you, and this inherent responsibility that your fellow colleagues don't have to worry about. Her introducing that at a young age, I appreciate it more now than I did before. And as far as chewing gum, I think it still holds the same importance that it held for me in 2017. I got to write about it for Ravishly when it came out. I wrote a piece titled Chewing Gum Matters, Here's Why, which I reread it again just to be like, was this my best? And I was like, probably not. But it was still the core.
It's good.
It's fine. Probably wouldn't have worded it that way, but it does hold up in terms of the thesis of, here you have a girl who knows nothing and is not punished by way of like violence or trauma for not knowing anything. She's allowed to make mistakes and be extremely awkward and be wrong in areas, but she's also not like a total loss when she has her moments of lucidity and moments where she can display that she is smart. She's just inexperienced.
A lot of it is autobiographical, so it's a lot of the stuff is just what happened in my school days. A lot of it is just, that's just my life. So I guess it was kind of easy in one sense to write, but then harder to make it artistic and not so in your face. I mean, Tracy essentially is, that's me. I grew up around Tracy Gordon's, that's the name of the girl in the play. And I didn't know anybody else other than like the people that my sort of small bracket of society was filled with. And as I got older, and when I went to Guildhall, I started meeting different people, and less I see Tracy. I don't really see people like me, my young self anymore. And I think I want to hold on to that person that I was before, that I still am. Just a grown up version, and I want to hold on to that. One thing I'd like to leave the audience with, it's probably for them to realise that they have more in common with that random, loud, annoying girl at the back of the bus than they think they do. It would have to be that You're
While
a
you were
little bit
talking
like
about
that.
that, it created this contrast of the character in Chewing Gum and Jodie. So I grew up in a Middle Eastern country, a lot of other Arab people, but then I went to a private educational school system. So all the expats in the region. I was one of two Arab students in my school, and I think maybe one of two Black people in the whole school as well.
Oof.
That sort of notion of being pushed as the gifted kid, like being the Benetton, the diversity, like the face, you know?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
I really relate to that. And I don't even know when I came across Daria. I had that same experience where I looked back at Jodie and then just realized all the ways that we intersected and all the different pressures that she existed under. And going back recently to rewatch it, a lot of Jodie's characteristic is about her search for identity, right? It's about her search of trying to figure out how to express herself, trying to define and construct her own identity to herself. So in opposition to all these factors, but also understanding that in the context of where she is, the only way she can do that is by being exceptional, by being the very best in the room. And then contrasting that with Tracy. Tracy is a mess. She is someone who is clueless, who doesn't understand the way of the world. And I remember when I first encountered Chewing Gum, feeling how radical that is to see not just a Black girl in that position, but a dark-skinned Black girl in that position in media, being allowed to be innocent. We don't see that very often. And I think one thing that is worth hitting on when we're talking about coming of age narratives is who gets those.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And could you talk a bit about that from your perspective about who gets the position of that positionality in the coming of age narrative quite often? And why do you, obviously racism, but why do you think Black girls are excluded from that?
Race?
Right.
Let's put on top of it before we say racism.
Insert Keenan gif of you know why, but there is. But also there is this very socialized understanding of what Black girlhood and what Black womanhood is, even through our own art. Listen, when I talk about this, we are not excluded from perpetuating some of those narratives in terms of Black girls and when they stop becoming girls in the eyes of the public. And it stops at a very early age, very early. And you see that permeate. Like an example of this, I love The Wood, one of my favorite like escapism movies starring Omar Epps and quite a few other people. But even there, it's positioned as the innocence of Black boyhood. And that's great. But also their experience, a lot of their sort of innocent experience is objectifying their female classmates in ways that like deeply inappropriate, maybe true to life, sure. But even in the coming of age stories of others that are in community of us, we don't get to be girls. We are and sexy and more closely related to grown women, even when we're like 15.
Adultification is like the term that popped into my head when you were talking about that, which is what happens to Black girls. Sorry, keep going.
And that's exactly it. It's if you ask a lot of Black girls, especially those who grew up outside of the suburbs when they were first catcalled super, super early. I know for me, it was when I was 10, being catcalled by a grown man, just walking to my friend's house. And those experiences really highlight when we stop being girls, when we have to start having the talks about being conservative with how we dress and being mindful of our natural bodies that we have no control over. And you see those narratives so often in art, whether it's made within our community or outside of our communities, that wasn't really allowed for many Tracys in the end, because Tracys are unicorns. Black girls aren't allowed to not know things and maybe not understand sex or not understand their own feelings. We have to have a huge handle on that when we're like 8. So it's reflected in a lot of the art around us. I think a lot about Juno, how that is a great movie, holds a very special place in memories that I have. But could we have a Juno with a Black girl? Never. I couldn't. Even now, it will be hard to have something along the lines of young teen pregnancy featuring a Black girl where she's still treated like a young woman, where she is still fully supported by her community. She is advocated for heftily. family, and where she's still allowed to learn, go to school, and not be pitied. Because even throughout Juno, the framing is, this is not a girl to be pitied. This is a girl to be honored. I don't see a landscape where that could be a Black girl without pointing to an obvious stereotype or falling trap to a very trite narrative about young Black girls. Yet that is a big coming of age story for a lot of white girls and women. It's basically just, we said, who gets to have these lessons with little consequence, socially or physically, and who doesn't. That's been a bit of a thing that's plagued Black storytelling. I was trying to look up to see what is considered Black coming of age stories for Black girls specifically. And so you have like Love and Basketball. I go to the church of Gina Prince Bythewood. So you cannot slander her to me.
Snipers on me.
Ever. But
I'm not gonna try. Why do you think I tried?
There was more of a warning just to the general universe. Like, we don't do that here. She got shooters here.
You can get with this or you can die alone. It's up to you.
But even still, Love and Basketball is considered like a coming of age story. But so much of that is bathed in trauma. Like, there isn't like a ton of lightness there. And then you have Pariah, The Wood, Moonlight, Menace to Society. These are some of the movies that pop to the top of general conversation, and they're all fantastic films. Not a ton of variety in terms of like how girls and women are positioned there. Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack.
That theme of pain, those are what's often associated with these stories. The failure of imagining something else. To imagine the Black story without associations with pain. There's something you were talking about earlier when you mentioned the socialized understanding of Black girls that is something that we all fall into, whether by intention or not. I recently, a few months ago, we were doing an X-Men 97 podcast. I don't know if you've seen that show, but we were talking about a specific scene where Storm was vulnerable and the breeze is gone. How she thought about wanting to be human. And I had a reaction where I was just like, I don't like that display of doubt in Storm. If you Star Child, we had on that episode, she countered me by saying, we don't get those kinds of stories about Black women. So maybe that is why you're having that reaction, that it's that strong Black women thing that has fed into your mind. And that was also a story about transition. So that really set my mind thinking about the way in which I'm predisposed in certain ways, those blind spots that I overlook the stories of Black girls. I pulled up that quote from Audre Lorde in 1984 was saying, we were never allowed to be children. Black girls don't have that space to be a child. And I was also reading this article in the Black Girlhood Studies by Ashley L. Smith while talking about Bell Hooks' reflections on Black girlhood. She identifies themes of loneliness, misunderstandings, fear, incomprehension, and yearning for belonging. These same sentiments and feeling about Black girlhood continues to be felt and experienced by young girls today. And then I'm not doubting that. I often find myself wondering if it's also a failure to imagine all the other things like girls are feeling.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that because there's obviously a lot of truth to that. We are fed this idea of the strong Black girl turned strong Black woman, where it's all rooted in having things figured out, this inherent responsibility to lead everybody else. Whereas, hit me up at my homegirls anytime, we're a mess. We don't know much of anything. We're all in this period of trying to figure things out. And there is doubt and loneliness and uncertainty that plagues us that we don't really get to explore that. But you are right. What we don't see as well is the flip side of what it means to be a Black girl. The joy of community, the fun of figuring out culture and figuring out ourselves and how we fit in culture before it's ultimately leached by other communities, unfortunately. Figuring out things like fashion, what our definitions of health are. We don't get that. And even when we do, I think there's always this sheen of, I don't even know what language to put to it. And I don't want to like be a hater or an anti or anything, but this is where I struggled with Harlem, the show on Amazon.
Yeah.
There's a few things, issues with that. One, just being like, I don't know about the script, but
look, support Black, buy Black, love my people.
Yeah, make no mistake, you won't find a bigger cheerleader for my people than me. That said,
things I avoid speaking about, don't I? I'm just gonna not do that today.
I am not here to yuck anyone's yum in any sense.
I said nothing about Cynthia Erivo's latest tweet. I'm being nice to people now. This is a new thing.
Imagine all the things we could be talking about right now already. And see, this is why I was just like, oh, maybe I shouldn't pop this top. But I am not saying Harlem is the only one that's guilty of this. You can turn to like Dear White People. You can turn to quite a few other things. But even in those narratives where it's like women trying to figure it out, there's still also this sheen of a soapbox that we have to occupy because it's our job to educate.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they have to coexist, even in some of the art that we create for ourselves. And I struggle with that because sometimes we're wrong. It's okay to learn and to unlearn and to figure things out along the way, but it's like we don't really see that. I think one of the better coming of age things for me that I still consider coming of age, and people I think can debate me as living single.
I was thinking of Girlfriends.
Yeah, it's here are these women that ostensibly should have it figured out, but don't. And
also that are unlikable sometimes, which I feel like is something we really don't get. That's why I love Insecure, just to bring that into the table, because Issa and Molly's character, while I liked watching them, they were also really unlikable. And while they were figuring things out, that transition area, that disorientation is not something we get insight into very often, and seeing the process go on.
And that's exactly with Insecure. You actively saw Issa have the process of unraveling things, figuring out, oh, here's where I went wrong. Let me figure that out. And in doing that, I'm going to create a brand new mistake that will carry me over. And that is so much closer to life than I had this experience. Let me educate my entire friend group real quick on what I've learned, and we will never make this mistake again. No, you probably will. And that's okay. And you were okay to stumble. And Molly, I had to really check myself there, because by the end of the last season, I was just like, why are we doing this with Molly? Can't stand her. What's happening? And then you get to the end where things are working out and she's happy and she's married and she is coming into her own. She's making the exact same mistakes that I probably made in my 20s. And in all sort of anchored in this idea of like her thinking that she had to have it figured out. There just isn't enough of an emphasis placed on us having the room to make repeated mistakes without judgment, without hard judgment. And I think that now we're moving into stories that are better equipped to handle that and to reflect that. I think of How to Die Alone in that regard. This, 30-something-year-old woman?
I think like approaching 40s, late 30s, 40s.
And she's in this period of transition on her own where in a lesser handled show, she'd be a mom of 2 to 3 because that was the narrative that we really had to push. Being younger was this idea of Black excellence, and that's a whole thing in and of itself. And she's bucking that. And maybe it's leading to some frustrating things of, girl, why did you make this choice? It doesn't make any sense for you to do that. But at least we have that. At least we have that option of the repeated stumble that hopefully will work itself out. I don't know about the end of that season. It seems she's consequences
of her. Hard. She stumbled real hard. How did you find How to Die Alone? What did you think of the show, since we mentioned it?
Oh,
exactly. Let me just say that. What to say? I love Natasha. I stand Natasha.
I very much want the best things for Natasha, specifically. I want only good things for her.
That's the most mom thing you've ever said. I'm not going to say what I want to say.
You did an excellent job. And I'm going to quote my good friend Stephanie Williams on this and be like, I'm glad it exists. Glad that it's here. It's definitely one of those things where I watch it once and I'm like, okay, I've got a sense of it and I hope it sticks around. I am still curious to see where it goes, considering where we left off. But would it be like my favorite thing? No. But her character is so interesting to me because we just don't get this.
She's so messy.
So messy. Incredibly messy. Is actively trying to do better, but maybe doesn't know how to be better, which is a very relatable struggle. I love that she has this opportunity to be extremely messy, even if it's at the expense of like reason sometimes. Hey, I'm not sure why you made this choice. You should have known that jail was imminent, but fine. At least she has this opportunity and the space to be a little bit of a scratch pad for her life. But I do think that it is one of it's one of the things that has really put into view my relationship with entertainment, especially for us millennials that grew up during a time where we were really kicking up conversations about representation and what we expected from our entertainment and what we wanted to see. It's putting into view this idea of art judged by quality versus art judged by utility, and what do we prioritize and when do we prioritize it? Because with How to Die Alone, would it be something that I would naturally gravitate towards? No. Am I glad that it exists? Yes. And I do have to sometimes wonder if the I'm glad it exists answer is enough. That's the thing that I struggle with a little bit, is what do we do when we interact with a piece of art that's important for very specific reasons that certain communities can understand, but may not be personally up to snuff in other areas like writing, strong narrative, strong direction, motive. These are things that should matter in a lot of the art we consume. But at the same time, we do have this overhanging systemic issue of, hey, if we nix this, are we going to have another opportunity to fumble and sort of fine tune how we tell stories? And before I would have been like, of course we are. And now, again, as we talked about earlier, the impermanence of streaming media now and how one slip up and your entire show could be wiped off of the face of the earth. It brings that utility bit more into focus. This is really important because we don't know if we're going to have another chance at it. But yeah, it's a bit of a it's a bit of a struggle.
On that point, permanence of streaming media, but also the shrinking of streaming media. I think of that era, I'd say probably post 2016, there was a lot more money in streaming to actually give people. But now when the money is less, we see who that money is being used for. We just went through what feels like a couple of years of a major culling of specifically Black stories and Black perspectives.
Miss Issa Rae, ma'am, first of all, I'm so glad that you were here.
I'm happy to be here.
You're here promoting Seen and Heard. I know that it is a celebration and a chronicling of the history of Black television. One of the parts of it that I think has been talked about, and folks will talk about it now and again, but the way that a lot of studios used Black audiences to build up their networks and then abandon them as as soon as it was convenient. It's something that anybody in the know understands, but I feel your documentary really details the hurt that it was inflicted upon the people that were involved in that moment. I'd love for you to preview a little bit about that and why it was so important, because that really does anchor the first episode.
Sure. I mean, it's one thing to say it, and one thing to like inherit. Like sometimes it sounds like a conspiracy. You know, you might have heard someone say that. You may have heard that in the history of television and the history of particular networks, but to have the actual creators, showrunners, writers telling you and chronicle the history of that is just like, it's undeniable. So to have that, again, we wanted to make a comprehensive history and to be able to showcase like with evidence that this is how they built the success of their networks on our backs, and we almost don't have anything to show for it as a result is tragic, and history repeats itself.
We lost Rapture. Yes. We have just lost Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Those are just at the top of mind. And we're not getting things to replace them. Before, it felt a bit better because we had these different properties. So I keep flashing back to like early Netflix, that excitement of On My Block, and Luke Cage was about to come out and it looked like it would be something interesting. And that wasn't shade. I thought we were going to skip over that one. All right.
We still can, but I will say the only thing that I'm going to add to that is fair.
Beautiful gowns. Beautiful. I had my friend Ash on earlier and we were talking about Black superhero media, franchise media specifically. We ended up talking about the post George Floyd boom, where like people felt the pressure to actually represent stories. But now we're on the other side of it. We can actually see and assess the kind of stories that came out, but also look at actually how much of that initiative continued on and where we see how much it's failed at, those initiatives, those pretenses of showing up for people, of giving a voice to these
stories that are unheard. Oftentimes, if they're cutting down stories from the underrepresented, they're going to start with women. They're going to start with Black women and then keep thinning from there. So we get a situation when we do get these stories, like you identified, they're often from heterosexual Black male perspectives that are taking us to empathize with that perspective, which is not to say we're against it.
And where it leaves us, then we end up back to scraps and crumbs, where we have to find these narratives tucked into larger stories. We had this really cool moment with Steven Universe. We were seeing a really high concentration of queer media, nuanced queer media. And then you had characters like Garnet, who got to be this really cool representation of Black queerness, or Black femme queerness in particular. I was like, this is great. This is going to blow things wide open. And we saw it in Craig of the Creek, which I thought was really cool. But then it got stripped back again. So you have to hope to find threads or instances. I think of Heartstopper. Tara, the character of Tara is really important, especially in this latest season. She reminds me a lot of Jodie in a sense, where there was a lot of expectation heaped on her in this latest season. They're preparing to go to college. There's this assumption that Tara is going to do great things, and she's feeling that pressure from her teachers, from her family, from her friends, from her own girlfriend even. We're seeing now that she's struggling with, what does life look like for her if she's not exceptional? What are her options when she feels gassed out a little bit? I think that's really important, but also it's a B story. We're not going to get much there just because
she gets 2 minutes an episode, if that.
If that. And of those 2 minutes, she's taking care of Darcy. It's things like that where we're getting differentiated media than we got when I was growing up, definitely. But it's still the same problem. It's still the same issue of, are we going to get the full spectrum view of Black girlhood in a show that exists on its own, where we're exploring different shades and experiences within that? Or are we going to be stuck having to search for ourselves with a microscope again?
Yeah, I'd also add, are we going to get new concepts and new explorations and new insights? Because I sent you the PDF document with all these different quotes that are dealing with the topics. One thing that really emerged for me, I don't know how else to phrase it, but the way all these theorists were talking about Black girls as if they were Black women and that adultification was happening. I forget which person mentioned it, but was talking about that as being a trait of Black feminist critique and intervention in the spaces, which is saying that Black feminist literature has been incredibly valuable in advancing these conversations. But ultimately, that is from the perspective of Black adult women reflecting back on their lives. That like really stuck to me, that we don't give the microphone to actually see these stories. To relate to that, part of the conversation was the way the concept of Black girl magic was being discussed. Just to bring up a TV show I really loved, and I mentioned before, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And the way the term Black girl magic features into that show, it's an exploration of a young Black girl who deals with anxiety, is dealing with family pressures, is dealing with living in America today, interacting with it, and the way in which Black girl magic is something that she aspires to and she leans towards and she inhabits, but also feels like a pressure. It's constructed as almost like an extension of that strong Black women trope being applied to young girls. That story meant a lot because a lot of what we're saying here is we're not looking at the Black experience of young Black women or young Black femmes in all of their facets. Instead, a lot of the literature kept talking about the classic stereotypes, the Sapphire, the Jezebel, the Mammy, and so on and so forth, and applying that to how we are viewing these young Black characters. And that rankled against me. How do you feel about that?
It's definitely, I think, really synthesizes the challenge in really capturing Black girlhood, because the bulk of the literature that we turn to does come from adult Black women, and they don't get it right all the time. You could point out problematic threads through every single one of the heralded Black femme literature leaders in our time and Black feminist theory, because it's heavily influenced by their understanding of life as older Black women. So a lot of those reflections, and we've been having these arguments for eons about feminism and specifically womanism, and how Black feminists who are figuring out feminism for themselves were heavily judged by some of the big theorists of our time, because there isn't enough empathy when we listen to the perspective of Black girlhood from Black girls. And Megan Thee Stallion is a perfect example of that. This is a woman that grew up before our eyes, actively made mistakes right before us. And instead of approaching that with empathy, she was largely met with ire. And you could look at any of the mistakes that she has admittedly made and has been very open and vulnerable about. And it's been used against her as basically a way to excuse the abuse that she has experienced up to this point. And so many Black girls have that same issue where it's like they speak from a place of like just figuring it out and learning, and immediately they're met with judgment, attempted words that I'm using that I don't actually believe in, but are used largely in culture. Cancellation's not a thing, but this idea of they didn't get it right, so they shouldn't have opportunities to learn and grow is something that is especially heaped. There needs to be more real estate for young Black girls to be given the mic to really talk about what they're going through without the need to attach it to this fully formed life lesson that they now have to package and make palatable for the rest of the world. Meg had the documentary released just recently, and of all the things that were revealed, the greatest mention was that she maybe lied, or not maybe, she did lie about having sex with a terrible guy. And it's strip it down.
Have you seen his
face?
Who
Among us?
I would lie too.
Like, what's the problem? Yeah, I would lie to Gail too. One, it wasn't Gail's business. Two,
have we seen it?
Who among us? He is balding. I would have kept it to myself as well. There are men that I, to this day, look at. I'm like, what was I going through?
I don't know.
Die kenne ich nicht.
What was happening there?
The other day, I was just, if you scroll down on your WhatsApp, eventually you'll get to that point where like it's just like a random assortment of numbers and a face, and I was just like, who the hell? Oh no,
I don't know the woman.
That was a dark time. That was. the choices we make. And look, you could ask me, there are certain instances you could have a picture of me with this man. You could have video evidence of me with this man. You could have audio. You have transcribed audio of me saying, I am going home. You can have a video of the event. To have relations.
You can have a video of the event.
I still don't know it.
You could have the video of the main event, and I will still lie
AI.
to your face.
Have you heard of AI? It's an ever-present danger.
Correct. I'm like, oh, deepfakes are advanced these days. Look at that deepfake. Because I don't want to relive that or unpackage that with you right now in this arena because I don't feel safe to do so. I'm just going to lie. That is a universal experience that transcends gender, race, age, and yet she was vilified for it. But she was trending because of it. And I'm like, if you get down to the heart of the things that you are skewering her for, they are no different than what any 20-year-old experiences at all. She just has the unfortunate curse of being successful and being on a global stage and having to actively unpack that in front of everybody. All you need to remember is that we all had a MySpace where we were embarrassing and having to unpackage things in front of like wide audiences. Don't do it. Please don't look at any of my quote unquote poetry. It's not good.
I'm gonna find that WordPress. I'm gonna find it. Well, now you put it out there. It's coming out. I'm looking at your show notes for Shannon.
No, now I've got to put together a real interesting bribery package now. But we all have the blessed gift of anonymity. And because of that, we get to have as many stumbles and fumbles as we want without being put in the public eye for judgment. And that comes directly into conflict with how we treat people in the public eye when they have these same experiences, because we need them to tell these stories in order for us to have the rich sort of storytelling landscape that we want. Given how we treat them when they do, why should they? So I just feel like we're always going to be stuck in this like weird purgatory until there's a deep societal change. Are we going to ever get it in mass? I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up Megan, because I had just watched the documentary yesterday, and I know we were recording today, so I related a lot of what was happening and what was being shown and presented that documentary to this conversation that we were about to have. And first of all, I'm just astounded at Megan. I love Megan. That's my birthday twin.
Like,
Love it.
but I kept thinking she wasn't allowed to be young, to be a girl, to be believed, to be vulnerable, to be a victim. And it was this refrain in the documentary where every couple of scenes there'd be interstitials where they'd show a bunch of TikToks and social media posts of people, specifically Black men in the industry, talking about what was going on and building up the liberatory narrative and countering her accounts of her experience and doubting the veracity of her story, doubting her desire to protect him initially. I think what has been valuable from this awful situation is that it's shown us those inter-community tensions. One thing that is really worth hitting on and highlighting is how this animus towards Megan was coming from Black men in our community. This doubt, this distrust, and I think that is all associated to what we have been talking about, this adultification of Black girls, this not inability, but the lack of desire to see the vulnerability in them. We continue to associate them with these stereotypes that have now become part of our social norm and understandings of Black women. This idea of the Jezebel, this idea of the lying Black woman, that's all been seeping in, is emerging right now. And for all the progress that we thought might happen from 2016 onwards, when things like Insecure were getting greenlit, when things like Rap Shit was coming out, when Issa Rae was building her empire, when Shonda Rhimes was the name on everybody's lips. We've made some progress, but there are some huge obstacles that we are still needing to address amongst each other.
Yeah, and I think the one good thing about social media and just having the increased ability to have these conversations loudly and in real time, I shudder to think what would have happened to Megan if this is something that would have occurred in the 90s, where these things were isolated. Now that we're at the age of celebrity documentaries that dig into things that were happening in the 90s and early aughts, what if this had been relegated to a story that we wouldn't have fully understood, considering how open she's been about her struggles with mental health and her struggles with suicidal ideation? Would she have been even here to be able to tell her story? Had this been 20 years ago? It's good to, like you said, put into very clear focus this inter-community struggle that we have, and this thing that I think Black women have been saying for decades. We are not nearly as supported as you think we are, even amongst the people that are supposed to defend us. And we've, again, been seeing so much of this since Trayvon Martin, seeing who's been on the front lines of advocating for Black boys and Black men, and seeing how those same advocates were being treated by the very Black men that they were set out to protect. Being able to loudly point that out is the thing that's going to be able to shift the needle. I think the louder that we are about protecting not only Megan, but women like Megan, women like the women in my family, women like me, women like my friends, the louder that we are about making sure that they are protected from this goal to tear them down incrementally, I think that we'll get closer to seeing the change that we actually want to see. Because Megan she's actually a superstar and globally known and revered, but she's still, at the end of the day, a woman who doesn't have parents, is having to face this really on her own, is in a city by herself, essentially, which luckily there were a few Houston rap figures that did come out for her and be like, how dare you tear down this woman who lost her mom and is living in LA by herself with nobody. Strip away all of the sheen of celebrity, and this is still a vulnerable woman having to handle this on her own. So the louder that we protect her and women like her, I think we'll get closer to
and I think
change.
On that same note, it's worth also thinking about, I suppose I'll say, the parallels. When you mentioned her mother, I just kept going to, people have given Kanye West so much sympathy for the fact that he lost his mother, but then we know that is part of Megan's story as well, and seeing the reactions. How do you feel about it? Go on.
The flip side of that, Chris Brown has a fervent fan base to this day, and his discretions are not private. They are repeated,
frequent and regular.
And yet he is a frequent, regular, and current. I'm sorry. People were asking about something with Usher. I think it was like the Super Bowl show. And they're like, oh, it would have been interesting if Chris Brown to join him. I'm like, did we not forget
need any more backup dancers? Oh my God, I forgot about that. No.
Square in the face at a birthday party at a roller rink. Craziest story I'd heard in a while. And everyone forgot and was like, why didn't he invite Chris Brown? This man gets repeated redemption arcs. Kanye gets repeated redemption arcs. And yes, exactly the point where it's, oh, this is directly in response to him losing his mother. And I'm like, that is a traumatic, awful, life-changing event that he shares with millions upon millions of people. And yet they don't become anti-Semitic. They don't become Trump supporters. They don't
marry a Kardashian.
Everyone around them. They don't marry a Kardashian and then make us feel sorry for her. Who, by the way, and just as needs to be said, is MAGA light. We need to talk more about that. But again, it just points to these same men that have so much to say about women, but will still defend to their gills their ability to play college dropout and to blast Touch the Sky from their cars and to ask, why doesn't Chris Brown have a Super Bowl halftime show? They will never understand the just wild irony of where they place their empathy, because for them, it's not about empathy. It just boils down to hating women. And that's what it is. And we have to be able to call it what it is and identify what the core of the issue is. Without that, we will never be able to just get to any form of a solution. If we keep saying, okay, these are Kanye super fans, these are Chris Brown super fans. No, these are misogynists. They're misogynoirists specifically. It just remains very wild to me to see the leaps and bounds you have to go through in order to justify where you place your empathy, which is why, in turn, now I have to be obnoxious when I defend my fellow Black women, because who else is going to do it?
I think it's really that's a really important point. I'll return to that idea that empathy is active. Empathy is something you do. It happens naturally, but also it's something that you can actively apply. There is something that must be spoken about who we give our empathy to, just like you were saying. Also, who sparks empathy for us, because misogynoir operates in various levels. And the most plainly obvious when you're looking at the different treatment of, say, Chris Brown versus Kanye West versus Megan Thee Stallion, the differing situations of personalities, the insidious ways it happens. That's been a big preoccupation for me, is the way that specifically gay and queer people don't show up for Megan, despite her being a queer person that is openly queer and has discussed it from the very first second that we met her. And then with slight bitterness, with the Charlie XCX moment happening now, like, okay, so how are you guys not seeing this? You are able to relate to these stories of queerness, or it's not even stories of queerness, to relate to this like pastiche of queerness. But then there's a queer woman right here who you're not acknowledging, who you are quote unquote unable to empathize or identify with, which I find that really fascinating.
Yeah. And we're seeing it happen to a lesser degree because it's still like early days, but with Doechii. Openly queer, and if you have listened to Alligator Bites Never Heal, which
give it the Grammy
top 3, but again, it's Doechii, who is, again, here's a woman who's never minced words about her sexuality, never minced words about her struggles with transitioning from Tampa to LA, how lonely that was, and how she turned to substance abuse to deal with that. And I just don't see that same groundswell of queer support for her, at least amongst non-Black gays, as we do for, you mentioned Charlie XCX, which I have to ask, and part of my ignorance here, is she queer?
No, it's like a diva worship thing. I don't even know where to begin with it. It's such a dissonance to me. Like, obviously not to hate. I'm glad to see a woman, specifically a woman who is half Asian, who's half Indian, from the UK, really hit the world and offer up something that for queer people to enjoy. I like that. Beautiful. But it hurts. And there's a rub to it.
Yeah, it is like again, Brat easily in my top 10 of albums this year. I definitely gravitate towards it, but not because of my queerness, just because it's good, fun music and a good breakthrough. But it's, oh my goodness, I wish that there was this enthusiasm for the Black women that are really putting their necks on the line to tell true to life stories about the thing they've learned.
That is a very real statement. They are putting their necks on the line, because when a female hip hop artist or just a woman releases a song, that is going to be picked apart. Look at how we all just picked apart Cobra. A woman has to engage in reputational warfare. A Black woman specifically, that a lot of people don't. Go on.
Say that again. Reputational warfare is such a perfect way to encompass what it is that we have to go through in order to tell our own coming of age stories. Because instead of finding the relatability in our things, it's met with, why didn't you know better? Why did you do this? Are you being being a good example. And this is why I afford a lot of empathy to Cardi B, who she could be the picture perfect replication of Jessica Rabbit sliding down a rose gold stripper pole proudly and just being the picture perfection of what twerking should be, what it should look like, and what sex appeal should look like. She's still fucking learning. She's still learning. And yeah, do I wish she would leave me out of her stuff with Offset? No. Kinda. I want to be out of the group chat, to be honest. But again, she's young. She's young. This is what this is. And she has this family. She is going through, I think, a lot of women who end up becoming single mothers, who end up putting a lot of faith in manipulative men, go through. And she's doing it on social media, and that's stripping a lot of that empathy away. And it's turning into stand-em wars. And at the end of the day, this is still a woman, a young woman, who had to grow up in front of us. She started on social media. We forget that it's not like she grew up in the rap circuit. Her main claim to fame was just being open on social media and being herself on social media. And then on reality television, and then moving into music, there's a bit of a learning curve there that she's not being afforded because she dared to not like Nicki Minaj. All of that empathy just gets thrown out the window for her when all she's trying to do is just figure out how to get away from this gross man that she's now attached to forever. And again, once again, who among us has not had to deal with that? And this is why I think I, again, push for varied and rich coming of age stories that feature non-white girls and women specifically, because the more we flood the space with these stories, I think the closer we will get to figuring out our own relationship with these women and women like these in our own lives, and figuring out our own response modes in
how we
these
exist
situations.
in the world as well with each other.
Yeah. How do we make space for each other? How do we figure out how to coexist with people that we may not necessarily like, but can still maybe understand at some level? It's all just interconnected. And it would be one thing if it existed in a vacuum and only impacted like our TV schedules, but it doesn't. It impacts the music that we listen to, the politicians that we herald, the teachers and the advocates that we go towards, and like the grace we give them when they ultimately fuck up. There's so much weirdly riding on this like little sliver of genre and entertainment. And I think the more that we call out for that, it shows like a willingness to just be better people that are better equipped to handle when other people make understandable mistakes.
Yeah, a big revelation for me watching that documentary was how on the Traumazine cover, Megan is holding newspapers, and one of the newspapers is talking about women having to deal with stereotypes, Black women stereotypes. Yeah, it's right there as something that is having to engage and navigate with, and like the heaviness of that. And I guess we've gone around and had talked about a lot of different things, but I think our main possible point is thinking about who our empathy is for, who we're lending it to, and who we can extend that for, who we can actually like challenge those perceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just learning how to be, even in this process, being more empathetic with ourselves and giving ourselves room to interrogate how we've maybe responded to certain things and stimuli in the past. I revisit a lot of my writing and sometimes even old Nerds of Prey episodes often and wonder if I still hold some of those opinions, if they have shifted. And a lot of stuff still holds, but some of it doesn't. Some of it, it's I probably could have been a little bit more empathetic here, or some of them just, I could have been a lot meaner here. We are in constant evolution with ourselves. With coming of age media specifically, I love it so much because it covers a sliver of that. It covers this thing that will probably change completely in 10 years. We could feel this way and love this person and hold these beliefs now, and 10 years from now, it could be completely different. That is the beauty of life. That is also what is very scary about life. And it is a very unifying thing. But the good news with all of that is that we constantly have chances to reinvent ourselves. We don't have to stick to who we are in this moment for the rest of our lives. We can change and hold just as much conviction 10 years from now. normalize change. Normalize being like, I learned something new and I don't feel that way anymore. It reminds me of, I don't know if you were like big in Parks and Rec.
I've seen some of it. I know the show well enough to understand.
Leslie Knope is at the process of, I think she was like running for election. She's up against these constituents that absolutely hate her. And there was like an optics opportunity where her and her husband were going to be a part of this pie contest, but he was going to enter as the pie maker and she was going to be the supporting wife. And it caused this ruckus. And so they were asking her about a past opinion. And she said, yeah, I changed my mind. It's like when I was younger, I thought chocolate milk came from brown cows. I learned, and now I don't think that anymore. That I have carried that stupid joke with me my entire life, from the moment I saw it to now, because that it's perfect. Yes, you are allowed to learn new information and change accordingly. That is the beauty of free will, autonomy, and life. I think that the more you open yourself up to looking at the evolutionary experiences of others, it will get you to a place where you can understand people a little bit more. So that is like the one thing, if I could ever offer to anybody, listen to nothing else that I say. I don't care. Like, I feel like I have cool opinions, but you don't have to like them. But if there is one thing that I could just beg people to do, is please become a stan of storytelling. If you're going to stand people changing beings, constantly amorphous, constantly wrong, don't do it. You will be disappointed every time. If you stand storytelling, stand varied and rich storytelling that allows you a window into different people's experiences and lives and their own relationship with change and growth, I promise it will make you a marginally more empathetic. Marginally. I don't know you, but I want to say it will at least be illuminating, and it will help you understand the beauty there is in humanity and empathy, and hopefully will inspire you to be just a little bit of a better person.
Yeah, narratives of humanity. They're important. Yeah, perfect. I think that ties us up into a bow now. And this completes the episode. Okay, so there's this new thing I've been trying to do, which is I would like for my guests to leave us off with a recommendation of something that will hopefully spark joy of some kind. So if you give us something that is worth checking out, that you love, that you think other people should, more people need to get in on.
Babe,
Give
don't do
us
this. I hold... This is such
she's pulled out the remote.
I've got one shot. I've got one shot to get this right. What have I watched and loved just recently? Please.
It doesn't have to be recent. It could be old. It could be anything. It could be music.
Don't open up the channels for me. That'll make it worse. Here's where, while I would love to remain on theme, I will say my recommendations, I think, are totally off theme with this episode, and I am so sorry. I love consistency. In terms of music, I want to make it everyone else's problem. But I feel like it's one of those things that you don't have to recommend. I feel like everyone's doing it. But Chromacopia, Tyler the Creator is...
Yes. I'm very pleased that he's coming for the Swifties right now. I hit play immediately. I was like, look, that is mother. He's the sister I never had. I don't know a better person. I don't know. Be better.
Because me waking up to find out he's fighting with Swifties, I'm like, how? Why? I have listened to this album like Renaissance level replay in this household. It's silly.
Give us your favorite song.
What is it today? The obvious answer feels like Sticky, but
I would have gone Sticky.
I mean, I want to do a 30-minute episode that dissects the feeling that we felt when those features popped up.
Oh, actually, we're probably done recording. Say goodbye, Shannon, and we can just talk off.
And that's the episode. Thank you so much for listening and joining me for another video episode of Referential. Once again, you can find Shannon Miller on Shannon L. Miller on Blue Sky and Shannon L_Miller on Instagram. And you can find more of her thoughts on pop culture on Pop Dish Kitchen on Instagram and TikTok. And as always, you can find me on all the socials at AlsoPerp at ALSOPURP. Make sure to follow me on TikTok at AlsoPerp, and if you are watching this on YouTube, then hit the like and subscribe button. And in case you didn't know, you could also find the extended show notes on my website, www.alsopurple.com. There you'll be able to find all of the quotes, the books, the TV shows, and movies and music that were cited, quoted, and referenced in the episode. Once again, that is www.alsopurple.com. Once again, thank you so much for tuning back in, the ones who were listening from episode 1 to all the new people. I've been noticing that there's been some new listeners lately, so hello, thank you for pressing play, and if you would like to support the show, which I would really appreciate, please leave a one-time rating on your Spotify app or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this, and recommend it to your friends, share it on social media. Word of mouth has really helped and will continue to help. So every time I see someone talking about the show, I am really grateful. Thank you so much for doing that. Keep doing it. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can find me at Khaliden with 3 N's at gmail.com. That is KHALIDENNN at gmail.com. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts about any of the previously released episodes or any of the future upcoming slate of episodes, which you can find on my website, then please get in touch with the podcast at referentialpodcast@gmail.com. But that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back in your ears very soon. Goodbye.